Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and tonight we will focus on impeachment, the whistleblower, the Ukraine scandal, how they are connected, and how the administration is handling all of the above. And we are going to also make you at home a part of the program. We open up our phone lines to you. The toll-free number there on your screen, 888-766-2428 or 888-RNN-CHAT. Now the question, do you support the impeachment inquiry? As I said, we want to hear from you, so give us a call. We will hear your voice. Now, let's start with the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. He has been subpoenaed by the House Democrats who are demanding information on President Trump's phone call to the head of Ukraine. We found out about that call after, of course, the whistleblower reported. As you'll recall, the president, he asked the Ukrainian president for a, quote, favor. That favor to investigate one Joe Biden and his son Hunter. We found out yesterday that Pompeo was, in fact, on the call in question. But before we knew he was on the call, Pompeo, he had this to say when asked about Ukraine.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that President Trump pressed the president of Ukraine 8 times to work with Rudy Giuliani to investigate Joe Biden's son. What do you know about those conversations?
So you just gave me a report about a high-seek whistleblower campaign, none of which I've seen.
Are you confident that none of your staff, that you or none of your staff did anything improper in this whole situation? Thank you.
So, Matt, I haven't had a chance to actually read the whistleblower complaint yet. I read the first couple of paragraphs and then got busy today. But I'll ultimately get a chance to see it. If I understand it right, it's from someone who had secondhand knowledge.
To put it politely, that is misleading. Plus, Pompeo is the latest official to stonewall Democrats who are investigating Mr. Trump. Now, he's accusing the Democrats of intimidating and bullying the State Department. Pompeo refusing to make staffers available to the lawmakers. The Democrats, they are pushing back, saying it is obstruction to block witnesses from testifying. Rudy Giuliani has also been subpoenaed. House Democrats want the president's personal attorney to provide documents related to Ukraine. President Trump, he's livid about all this as usual, venting on Twitter. I'm going to read just a few of the tweets. This is, after all, an hour-long program. Quote, Representative Adam Schiff illegally made up a fake and terrible statement, pretended it to be mine as the most important part of my call to the Ukrainian president, and then read it aloud to Congress and the American public. It bore no relationship to what I said on the call. Arrest for treason, question mark. Now, this about that, the President of the United States threatening the head of the House Intelligence Committee with an arrest for treason. In another tweet, the President went off, this time on the whistleblower. Like every American, I deserve to meet my accuser, especially when this accuser, the so-called whistleblower, represented a perfect conversation with a foreign leader in a totally inaccurate and fraudulent way. I want to meet not only my accuser, who presented second and third-hand information, but also the person who illegally gave this information, which was largely incorrect, to the whistleblower. Was this person spying on the U.S.? Big consequences. The president, as many of you know, went one step further. While speaking to the American workers at the United Nations last week, he said this.
I want to know who's the person that gave the whistleblower, who's the person that gave the whistleblower the information? Because that's close to a spy. You know what we used to do in the old days when we were smart, right? With spies and treason, right? We used to handle it a little differently than we do now.
What he was alluding to, by the way, is we used to hang spies in the United States. Now, the Republican caucus is either staying silent or supporting the president, but there are a few fissures showing. The most senior Republican in the Senate defending the whistleblower. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa says the whistleblower appeared to follow the law and he deserves to be heard as well as protected. But Trump, while his supporters in the right-wing media, they're teeing off on the whistleblower. Listen to what radio host and also host on Fox News, Mark Levin, said.
If this CIA operative is going to be the guy that brings down my president, I want to know all about him. I want to know what kind of dogs they have, how many marriages they've had, if they have a DUI. I want to know if they're a partisan. I want to know everything.
And now the whistleblower fears for his own safety. In fact, right-wing activists have offered a $50,000 bounty to anyone who outs him. Then there's this. President Trump tweeting out the following, a quote here from a pastor named Robert Jeffress. Quote, if the Democrats are successful in removing the president from office, which they will never be, it will cause a civil war-like fracture in this nation from which our country will never heal. Well, joining me now is former CIA officer Evan McMullin. He was also an advisor to Republicans in Congress and also a former independent presidential candidate in his own right. Evan, thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You wrote an editorial, which I want to get to some of the points in it. But first, let's talk about the whistleblower and I think very rational concerns apparently on his part about fears of safety. The idea in the surreal world we live in that the president is talking about hanging treasonous folks who come forward and by all accounts follow the proper protocols, people offering bounties on the head here and other. I don't know where we're living or the time that we're in right now, but somehow, some way, folks have moved past that. That's obscene in the pale.
It certainly is. It just certainly is. First, it's a new realm we've entered into, I think, in terms of presidential corruption. We've never seen anything like this in this country. This is what we're seeing from President Trump goes well beyond what we ever saw from Nixon. Nixon didn't even come close to what we're seeing here, selling out the country, using presidential powers to secure, to search for, to obtain, to compel foreign interference in our next election. It's just absolutely un-American. I mean, you sort of see this thing overseas. I saw it as a CIA officer overseas. This kind of efforts by aspiring authoritarians to do an end run around the will of their people and to dismantle any checks on their power. And one of the main checks that we have in this country, there are many, but one of the primary checks is whistleblower protection, laws that allow people to raise with authorities through specific channels waste, fraud, and abuse, or evidence of that. And if we don't have the ability to protect those people, then others like the one that has stepped forward in this case are more likely to be silenced in the future. And I think that's what the president's going for now. He understands that he's vulnerable due to his own corruption, and he needs to close off that channel of information flowing to the American people. And that's why you see him threatening, indeed, violence to any who might think to come forward with information about acts of corruption on his part.
You know, I thought the piece you wrote was fascinating. And again, you drew on your experience as an undercover CIA agent to say, we've seen this playbook before. Typically, we'll see it in the Far East or in developing nations. But there is a playbook by strongmen. We're even starting to see it in some Western nations, as you point out. But anyone who thinks after 3 years of this presidency and the year leading up to it in the campaign that he will some way stop on his own, just look at the calendar. The Mueller report, the day after it's released, they have these conversations with the Ukrainians. There's no such thing as shame. And I want to read one portion of what you wrote. You said, what appears to be an attempt to abuse the powers of his office to compel the Ukrainian government to help him politically by harming his main rival is alarming evidence that his corrupt efforts to hold onto power are escalating. That trend is unlikely to stop on its own. Anybody who treats this as a one-off, that he'll get the message here and you won't see it anymore, which I think in some circles they're still holding out hope for, it's not paying attention to history or what we know of other people when they're put in desperate situations.
Well, look, I think you're so right. And I think there are a lot of people in this country, good, well-intentioned, hopeful people, including Democrats in Congress who are, now have a new posture that I think recognizes the reality. But I think Trump felt emboldened after he was not held accountable through the Mueller investigation, neither by the DOJ for reasons related to their own policies, but then more importantly by Congress. And I think Trump looked at that and thought, look, I don't face criminal prosecution. Congress doesn't have the will to hold me accountable because even Democrats are looking at this in very conventional terms. So I, Trump, can now I have a freer hand to pursue more foreign election interference, which is what helped me come to power in 2016, to get around the last real check on my power, which is the American people and their will as expressed through our elections. And I'll say this is a pattern that's important to notice, that I saw overseas, which is that the more corruption leaders engage in, the more corruption they have to engage in even beyond that in order to protect themselves from the consequences of the original corruption. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And it eventually can even get cruel, where you have authoritarians using government power to abuse their people in sometimes very cruel ways. And we've seen hints of violence from the president, raising civil war, talking about executing whistleblowers. This pattern has to be interrupted by some force outside of the White House and the executive branch, and really Congress must do that, or we are risking perhaps not having a free and fair election in 2020.
Well, let me ask you a question about Congress, and more specifically Republicans. As I mentioned before, you advised Republicans in Congress, and as I mentioned, presidential candidate in your own right. You said, and I want to read a quote here from Senator Flake, former senator from Arizona, who said in part, "My fellow Republicans, it's time to risk your careers in favor of your principles. Whether you believe the president deserves impeachment, you know he does not deserve re-election. Our country will have more presidents, but principles, well, we get just one crack at those. Trust me when I say that you can go elsewhere for a job, but you cannot go elsewhere for a soul." I'm going to ask you, what is your gut telling you? I know there's apologists. I mean, we've seen a bunch over the weekend try and rationalize things, but there's been a lot of silence by some. Where do you believe, for the folks in both the Senate and the House Republicans right now, down deep, there's a political component, just for transactional politics, he may drag the party down next fall, but beyond that, beyond when this president is finally gone from the White House, where does it leave the party? How conflicted do you think Republicans are, and do you think I'll be surprised by how many will come forward and say this was a line that I can't abide by, or that they'll swallow and take it?
I think they are conflicted, and I think that's a good way to put it. They're conflicted by political realities versus their principles and what they know is right, what Jeff Flake spoke of. On the political side, I think the way to understand this situation is that, look, we're in a presidential cycle now. The president is a Republican. And so Republicans in Congress who are interested in keeping their seats and in the Senate maintaining their majority, they know that if the president collapses, so does the entire Republican ticket. So they have to prop him up to avoid that. And I think so that's the political thought. But also at the same time, I think most of them realize that he has crossed lines, and many Republicans have different views about where he crossed the lines. Was it in the cover-up? Was it in the action itself? What was it? As more Americans who are Democrats, independents, and Republicans all grow to favor the impeachment inquiry and to be open to impeachment, I think they're going to be watching those numbers, and the more those numbers shift in favor of the impeachment inquiry, the more likely they're going to be to express their own concerns. But I think this is a situation where they've got to step up and do the right thing for the country. I truly believe the republic is at stake. We cannot afford to have a Congress that doesn't hold this president accountable, because if not, we just may not have a free and fair election in 2020. And if that's the case, we have truly lost the republic. And I hesitate to say things like that, although I say them often, because it sounds alarmist, but I truly think that's what's at stake here. And we're not the first country to face these challenges, and we won't be the last. But the important thing is for us to acknowledge them and deal with them head on. And I encourage all Republicans in Congress to do exactly that.
Evan McMullin, I really appreciate the time and also the insight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, you heard from our guest. Now I want to hear from you. Phone lines open right now, the toll-free number right there on your screen, 888-766-2428, 888-RNN-CHAT. So, question is, it's the one that basically the Congress is going to have to wrestle with. Do you support the impeachment inquiry? Where do you come down on this? Phone lines open. We'll get your reaction after this. We'll see you on the other side of the break.